Joining us is a gentleman who is no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a special good evening to former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine. Welcome, sir.
Hello, good night, sorry.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for taking time out to link with us here. Well, it's the day after Mr. Ramnarine, and so much information is being bandied about dragon gas, what's going to happen, what is going to be the geopolitical policies. Is it going to be a priority? Are we still going to have to wait 2027? Is it going to be a pipe dream? Where are we, and what are we looking at?
Well, the U.S. elections have come and they have gone, and the result is a decisive result. You know, there is no need for recounts. There's no need for the intervention of the U.S. Supreme Court, as happened in the year 2000 with Al Gore and George W. Bush. It's a clear, decisive outcome. Mr. Trump has been elected. In fact, they're still counting ballots in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean. Well, it is the current government of Trinidad and Tobago has pursued a natural gas policy for the last 9 years, which has focused on getting supplies of natural gas from the United States, from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the projects are, the Dragon project would be the better known of the two projects. And the other project is the Coquina Mannequin project. And those projects both have licenses with the Venezuelan government. In the case of Dragon, it's a license between Venezuela and Shell and the NGC. And in the case of Coquina Mannequin, it's Venezuela again and BP and the NGC. Dragon is 30 years and Coquina Mannequin is 20 years. But those two licenses exist in a framework, are overseen. There's a license hanging over those two licenses called an OFAC license, which is where the government of the United States they carved out a space in the sanctions on Venezuela, in which Trinidad and Tobago, Shell, BP, Venezuela, and so on, were allowed to operate in that carved out space in the sanction. But those licenses have expiration dates. I believe the first one expires in 2025 and the second one expires in 2026, or around there. So those licenses will be either renewed or not renewed by a Republican government in Washington. And the question is, to what extent does the Keith Rowley, Stuart Young administration have, contacts, or to what extent have they been speaking to the Republican Party? And from my observation of their movements in Washington, D.C., and of the persons that they've been meeting with and interacting with, it would seem that their interactions in their diplomatic interactions and dealings in Washington, D.C. have largely been with the Democratic Party, which is now, to use our Westminster jargon, is now in opposition
right,
in Washington, D.C. So where does that leave us? I heard somebody saying that the government does speak to both sides of the aisle, but I've never seen any proof that they were speaking to Republican congressmen, senators, or they have any link to the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration. I remember, as you would remember, the last time President Trump was president of the United States, he had a gentleman in Mali Street, Port of Spain, as the ambassador named Joseph Mondelo, who is now deceased.
Yes.
And Ambassador Mondelo and Stuart Young and the Keith Rowley government, you remember they had a dispute.
That's right.
And that dispute played out for several days in the parliament, in the newspapers. And I was looking back into the history of it today, and I saw Reginald Dumas getting involved. He is also deceased and so on. And, that dispute had to do with Delcy Rodriguez, who was, at the time, I think she was the vice president of Venezuela at the time. She might still be the vice president, but she's now, in addition to being vice president, she's Minister of Petroleum. She came to this country during the COVID, and that, of course, created quite a stir, and there were many, allegations and so on moving around that certain international treaties were violated, and the sanctions, and there were the issue of the sanctions on Venezuela and so on, and all that. So President Trump would, of course, be aware. When he hears Trinidad and Tobago, he'll remember, well, I had a guy there named Mondello, who was my personal friend. Mondello, who campaigned with me and so on in 2016, and Mondello had this issue. So that comes back up, right? And if President Trump does not recall it, I'm sure the people who are supporting his foreign policy formulation and so on would remember it. The other issue is that I remember the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago referring to the opposition leader of St. Lucia as Tropical Trump in a derisive manner, right? So I mean, what was he implying by calling the man tropical, by calling Mr. Chastity Tropical Trump? So those sort of unforced diplomatic errors are things that we could do without. So I'm just giving you the context. I think that the government's position, the current government's position, as it relates to their diplomatic standing in Washington, D.C., is now radically different. Because the bridges that they have in Washington, D.C., the bridges that they have built over the last how many years have largely been with the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party controls no organ of governance in Washington, D.C. anymore. So where does that leave us now with Dragon and Coquina Mannequin and our interests as they relate to Venezuela? So I think that is the context there that I wanted to give this evening to the listeners, right? That we have to really now wait for President Trump to take office in January. And now, the other interesting point that was raised with me this evening is that the Republican Party and President Trump won Florida convincingly. Florida used to be what we call in Trinidad and Tobago a marginal seat.
Yes.
Florida is no longer a marginal seat for the Republican Party. It's a safe seat. They won Florida by, I think, 7%. That's a big margin now. Florida has a lot of Cuban voters, people who are, descendants of Cubans who would have come to that state in the 1960s and so on, when the Castro regime took over. And I think Castro took over in 1959, and the emigration started and so on. People were coming up to Florida on makeshift rafts and boats and so on. And then in recent years, there's been an exodus of Venezuelans into Florida. So one of the insights I was given into in that explains the strength of the Republican Party in Florida is the support that they would have gotten from the Cuban community and the Venezuelan community in that state. So of course, Senator Rubio, who is a Republican senator, who is himself of Latin American ancestry, he has expressed very strong views about Venezuela and the Maduro administration. So we, taking all that information together, we could sort of have some idea that the Trump administration is going to be a bit more robust towards Venezuela.
But Mr. Ryan, let me just interject here. What stands out as well, and I was just speaking to political scientist Dr. Indira Rampasad on the issue of climate regulations. As you know, Mr. Trump has always mentioned as far as climate change as a hoax. And he's going to make these climate regulations to help the American car industry. Of course, he's not a supporter of electric vehicles, and he's pledged to increase production of U.S. fossil fuels, vowing to, according to him, drill.
In my view, he has said that there's a place for electric vehicles in America, but it cannot be that we have to give. What he's saying is that we have to give people the option of the gasoline and the diesel and the electric. Because you remember, one of his main supporters in the election is Mr. Tesla himself,
right?
Elon Musk, who is Mr. Electric Car. So I think that the Trump administration is not going to eradicate electric cars. I think there's going to be a balance between the gasoline, the diesel, and the electric vehicles. But You were saying that Dr. Ramprasad had made a point about the climate change policy.
Yeah. And she said basically
Right.
that would affect us indirectly because when you look at these are basically a lot of the main focus and that climate change has been been spoken about by Mr.
Yes,
Trump time
well,
and time again.
definitely,
He
yes,
came out
yes.
of the climate
Yeah.
deal. So where does that put us in this part
Well,
of the
I
region?
think I was reading his website. Which had an energy policy section, and they said that last time he was president, he withdrew the United States from the Paris Accord,
Yes.
which is an international agreement that commits countries to certain targets, targets for reduction of carbon dioxide emissions in different sectors, power generation, industrial, and transport. But then, of course, the Biden administration came in 2021 and they returned the United States to the Paris Accord. So I would think that President Trump would want to again remove the United States from the Paris Accord agreements. That's one. Two, the Biden administration last year put a ban or a moratorium on the construction of new liquefied natural gas export terminals because America was well on its way to becoming the number one exporter of LNG in the world. In fact, there are some months they are the largest exporter of LNG in the world, and they sort of toggle back and forth with Australia and Qatar. Those are the top three exporters of liquefied natural gas in the world. So President Biden had put a moratorium on new LNG export terminals. President Trump is going to overturn that very quickly. And it means that the American natural gas and LNG industry is on full throttle. And what that means is that in a few years from now, America is going to literally flood the world with liquefied natural gas because they are the world's largest natural gas producer. So how does that affect us? Well, we sell natural gas to the world but as LNG, as liquefied natural gas. So the price of LNG is going to obviously be facing downward pressure. That's one. The second thing he said with regard to his energy policy is that he is going to unshackle the American oil industry, that he is going to debottleneck, remove red tape, make it easier for them to get approvals to drill, and his energy policy could be summarized in 3 words: drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
Because he has committed to the American people lower energy cost, lower energy. But energy is a part of your existence.
Exactly.
Your electricity.
Electricity. So
Cooking,
lower
your
heating bills.
Cooking gas.
Yeah, lower heating bills and what have you.
Your heating bills, your diesel for your trucks. And the American economy depends heavily on those big trucks that you see, those haulage trucks that you see on the freeways and the highways of America to move goods and services around. So if the American oil producers, who are already, number one in the world, right? I know there was a minister in Trinidad who used to say number one in the world, right? You remember that number one in the world.
Yeah.
But the American oil industry is the number one oil producer in the world. They produce about 13 million barrels of oil per day. If President Trump is going to give them more incentives and debottleneck, they are going to increase that production probably to 20 million barrels of oil per day. So America is again going to be exporting a lot more oil, exporting more gas, and these things have consequences for global prices, and of course consequences for countries like Trinidad and Tobago. So that, to me, those are 2 things that he is going to do pretty quickly. So and the third thing, of course, is that we expect that he's going to be a bit more robust and bullish and so on when it comes to Venezuela. But on the other hand, I think he is aware that the more the Venezuelan economy declines, is the more likely you will have immigrants trying to get into the United States. So the other consequence of the Trump administration for Trinidad and Tobago is if that border, which the Biden administration now I'm being told is trying to seal, if that border becomes totally shut between Mexico and the United States, you may have more Venezuelan migrants looking to go elsewhere, who can't get into the United States. So we may have an increased pressure of Venezuelans coming to Trinidad. And I think this issue of the Venezuelan presence in Trinidad is something which our mainstream media is not addressing at all. And in fact, one of the things, Mikey, that President Trump and this election has shown, according to Elon Musk, we are the media, meaning that what is media in the world has now changed, right? You have people who have podcasts in America, like Joe Rogan, who are more powerful than networks. So that's a little segue, but the whole issue of the Venezuelan presence in Trinidad could become a much larger issue if you have that sealing of the U.S. southern border, and if you have the Venezuelan economy going into further decline because oil prices are low and gas prices are low and so on. So these are all things that that a country like Trinidad needs to be looking at all these scenarios and thinking about how we position ourselves to bulletproof our country.
Yeah, and what about the sweeping tax cuts? That stands out as well. He's talking about new tariffs of at least 10% on most foreign goods, and that he says is going to be able to cut the trade deficit.
Yeah, I think what he's trying to do, and very interestingly, I want to make the point that I was looking at U.S. trade data. This is not Trinidad's data. This is American data. And they don't make joke with their data collection and their data presentation. Our trade balance with the United States is almost zero, meaning that what we export to the United States is almost equal to what we import from the United States. That trade balance with the United States has been coming down every year. It peaked sometime around the early part of 2011, 2012, around there, and it's been coming down all the way. So our trade balance with the United States is close now to zero. And I checked these numbers on the U.S. Census.gov website, right? So that's something to be wary of. But the other thing is that if the purpose of putting tariffs on goods coming in from China and so on is to strengthen American manufacturing industries and to create jobs and so on. Because one of the areas that the president has, where the area that made him president last night is called the Rust Belt, and those are the states of Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio and so on, and those are the states that had the early industrial development of the United States, because they are along the Great Lakes of the U.S. And as America deindustrialized, you had places like Michigan and cities like Detroit and so on becoming what they call the Rust Belt.
Right.
So his mandate would be to resuscitate the industries in those states, right? So that would be the reason for the talk about tariffs and so on.
Yeah, but what's interesting here, looking at this, the Economist Intelligence Unit take on this economy, our economy, is that given the heavy reliance of the economy on oil and gas, waning domestic hydrocarbons production will cause GDP growth to decelerate over the medium term, and softer energy prices will remain a risk to the outlook throughout the 2024-28 forecast period. Now,
well, I just want to say there's something which Terence Farrell spoke about. I have spoken about. Wade Mark spoke about it in the Senate, and I want to talk about it again tonight.
Go ahead.
In the budget speech, the Minister of Finance said that in 2023, this economy, Trinidad and Tobago's economy, grew by 1.3%. And he said that it was expected that the Trinidad and Tobago economy will grow again in 2024, this year by 1.9%. And when I heard the 1.3, right, because I wasn't really tracking the 1.9 that much. When I heard the 1.3, I was very much taken aback because I had the data from the CSO, which is public data, for the first 9 months of 2023. And for the first 9 months of 2023, the economic growth in Trinidad and Tobago was 0%. So where does this 1.3 come from, Mikey? Unless there was some massive boom in the economy in the fourth quarter of 2023, of which I wasn't aware, right? I wasn't aware of any boom in the economy. So when we examine the document called the Review of the Economy, and we went to page 194 of the Review of the Economy, we saw that the 1.3% and the 1.9% that the minister referred to in the budget speech were not numbers produced by the CSO. They were numbers produced by the Ministry of Finance. And I am not aware that the Ministry of Finance has the capacity to do that sort of statistical work. So we have to take that comment from the budget about 3 consecutive years of economic growth, 22, 23, and 24, with a significant pinch of salt. I am of the opinion that this economy did not grow in 2023, but we are waiting with bated breath for the CSO to put out the official 2023 growth number. And what I find very odd is that I am talking to you in November 2024, and I don't have 2023 data for my economy, right?
Yeah.
So when I look at the Guyanese Ministry of the Guyanese government, you can get those stats for 23. Jamaica, the same thing. Barbados, the same thing. But here, we are into the 11th month of 2024, and we're still waiting to get 2023 economic data. And then you have the minister saying the economy grew in 23.
And let me ask you this, Mr. Ramnarine. So
but that data comes from his ministry.
Yeah. 2027, do we have anything to look forward to? I mean, is there anything concrete?
Well, the Prime Minister said that, things will, the next couple of years are going to be difficult, and like 2027 things will improve, and Trinidad and Tobago will be,
But what was he
Trinidad and
basing?
Tobago will be in a better position.
What was he basing this
He's basing
2027?
that on the production of natural gas from the Manatee project in 2027.
I see.
Now, my information is that Manatee will not start production until the third quarter of 2027. So its impact wouldn't really be felt in 2027 because when you start production in a natural gas field, it doesn't automatically start at the maximum. It's like you're trying to raise the volume slowly. You have to ramp up production. So the impact would not be felt until 2028. But even so, we don't know what the price of natural gas is going to look like in 2028 or 2027. Because as it is right now, there's a global oversupply of natural gas. And with President Trump promising to do the things that he says that he will do, then you could have an even bigger oversupply of natural gas in the world. And prices could go even further down. So nobody knows what 27 or 28 is going to look like. What we know is that 2024 doesn't look good. 2025, the production of oil and gas will again go down, and I think the production will continue to go down until 2027. You will get some relief in 2028, but it doesn't really take you back to where you need to be. You will still be well short of what you need, right? While Manatee does help, it doesn't get us back to the promised land, right? So we are in a position where we have to transform the economy, and diversification, which is a word which has been abused since I was a child. I've been hearing about diversification.
Yeah, but you have to have the political will to do that.
Well, apart from that, I think you have to have the political will is very important.
And the know-how.
But you have to cultivate the economic soil for diversification to take root, and for the seeds of diversification to germinate. And one of the things that recently, three gentlemen won the Nobel Prize in Economics for a piece of work they did called Why Nations Fail. And it's a book called Why Nations Fail. And I've read the book. And a big part of the reasons why that they put forward for the failure of many countries in the world that are endowed with natural resources is when you structure an economy that excludes many people. And I think that to some extent, or to a large extent, we have an economy of exclusion in Trinidad and Tobago, where the economy is becoming too dominated by big business and by, you have literally the creation of monopolies taking place in this economy. So what we really need to do is to create more, create more opportunity for a wider swath of people to get into business.
Yeah,
Right? Or to take the existing SMEs in Trinidad and grow them to become big business. So, I mean, and this is not Kevin Ramnarine spouting any ideology. This is the work of three Nobel laureates who just got the Nobel Prize last month, right? By studying countries around the world that have failed, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of the economy is concentrated in a very small area among a very small group of people to the exclusion of the entire country.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is a fundamental problem that is happening here in Trinidad and Tobago.
I would agree with you.
So now we come to the issue of the forex.
But the thing about it, our time is up.
We have so much to talk about because
Yeah.
the forex is a big one, and the forex issue speaks directly to everything we just spoke about.
Yeah.
All right. So whenever you're ready again,
we can do the for. I want to thank you so much for taking time out. I mean, like I said, we don't come here to sell doom and gloom, but again, these are very serious questions. And now that we're dealing with the the aftermath of the elections in the United States, there are a lot of things that we have to look at, and a lot of questions have to be answered. Where do we go from here? As you mentioned, the Manatee. That's the third quarter of 2027. And then again, when are we going to start seeing benefits from that? When we start on that in that third quarter?
Okay. And let me just, if you would allow me, let me just close by congratulating President Trump on making history, being only the second person to be elected to non-consecutive terms as president. And let me congratulate the American people for, this brilliant exercise in democracy that they have every year, every 4 years.
And I'm sure soon we here on The Observer will be congratulating you for going through the screening process and being selected as a candidate for the next general election.
Well, you have to take inspiration from what you see in the American politics,
There you go. Thank you so much again. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.